Day 940 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 639,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,340 in the past day. Then as for hardware losses, 20 tanks, 39 APVs, 35 artillery, and 2 air defense systems. Then headed straight to the map into the Donbass region, where we will follow up with a look at the Toretsk direction, with not a lot in the way of map changes, but there is no shortage of activity with urban-style warfare taking place. As you see here, street battles for Toretsk through the eyes of a soldier of a Ukrainian Special Forces battalion, and a lot of which feels somewhat reminiscent of World War II European urban warfare engagements, making it somewhat shocking to realize that the Russo-Ukrainian War is considered the biggest war on the European continent since World War II in terms of its scale, intensity, and impact. Even in terms of externally displaced refugees, those that fled the country, which currently sits on about 8 million Ukrainians, being a figure that is far greater than anywhere else in recent decades, including that of Syria. And yet, the Kremlin is okay with all of this in 2024, or perhaps better to say, okay with denying this in 2024. Then headed just south of here into the Pokrovsk direction, which now accounts for 112 kilometers or 70 miles of a frontline salient that Russia has since created, thereby somewhat leading the Russian forces to become a victim of their own former land gains made in this sector over the last 9 or 10 months, being that they expanded from a 25-kilometer front line, thereby amounting to a 450% increase in land to both defend and launch offensives from, created out of thin air, all for a single location on the map, which indeed may be playing a role in their loss of momentum for this region in the last fortnight or so, which isn't made any easier with examples like these on the screen showing the AFU systematically take out cars, trucks, rocket launchers, and self-propelled howitzers of the invading forces. Russia did, however, over the past 24 hours, cut into a northeastern pocket of the fields north of Krasnohorivka, with a somewhat fair expectation that they will take the remainder of this land at some point. Although by the same token, the slow pace at which these events are unfolding indicates the increasingly unlikely nature of any sort of rushed or botched AFU withdrawal from the area. But as far as things go for the Kremlin's Pokrovsk offensive in this direction, and I've said this a few weeks ago as well, but the further that the Russian army outwardly expands from this bulge, inherently creates an exponential increase of frontline positions that the Russian army has then to provide sufficient additional manpower for, plus of course, more armored vehicles and artillery requirements. Now I could oversimplify this and say that Russia is a victim of their own success, but in taking almost a year to create this bulge, followed by the tremendous casualties of somewhere between 60 to 90,000, not to mention the loss of thousands upon thousands of vehicles and weapons, the situation rings much closer to the definition of a Pyrrhic victory more than anything else. Then headed down on the map because Russian forces recently launched attacks in the Vuhledar and Kharkova directions, involving around 70 to 80 armoured vehicles and tanks. Ukraine's 46 separate airmobile brigades successfully destroyed at least 15 enemy armoured units. However, we will zoom in here because Russian troops managed to capture some of the positions near to Herahivka, although they were unable to achieve the intended operational breakthrough. Then headed all the way up on the map to Ukrainian Kursk operations, which continue to hold high confidence in the Novyi Pot and Veseloy region, with most recent Ukrainian gains to the northeast, where if we are to zoom in, we can see the highway leading to the town of Glashkovo, which in turn leads to the disabled permanent bridge from last month, though I am speaking too conservatively here as the bridge was destroyed. thereby providing zero means of logistical support for the Russian forces from there on out. Then headed to the east, but not too far away, as the Russian forces claimed that the units of the area captured Byakovo, although this was later debunked as they have not secured the area to date. And so this is part of the information landscape that we have to work within. Quite a bit actually, with Russia being no stranger to making claims that don't exist as an actual reality, an actuality. Sometimes we even come across such dramatically contrasting Russian doom posting from other Russian sources stating a grim or deteriorating picture. But then as for particular note for this region, we saw footage of a Ukrainian ground drone backed by mortar, firing its 762 MG fire at a Russian position. And although it's not technically as impressive as a warhead strapped to a quadcopter, even still, we've seen such little in the way of this type of platform as being used by the AFU to date in this war. So it really captures the imagination of what the future of unmanned warfare could indeed look like. Now, these platforms at the moment have surprisingly limited range, somewhere in the vicinity of 16 kilometers or about 10 miles. Although these platforms could technically loiter for hours, if not days, consuming very little battery in the process. The battery design also has the added benefit of making for a much quieter operation. Also impressive about this platform is the width and height design of this machine, perfect for driving over and beyond landmines. Look at that right there, without even breaking a sweat. So these Lyot autonomous ground vehicles, or AGVs for short, were seen in testing during the winter, but have clearly since then been upgraded to combat ready, and not even on Ukrainian soil. Also in Kursk, we saw the decommunization on the Russian territory, then headed across to the wider map because somewhere in the east, we saw the destruction of another Russian Mr. S self-propelled howitzer. So this 152mm SPG was attempting to hide in a forest belt, but the ammunition-loaded turret detonated after an exceptional strike by a Ukrainian FPV, which was called in after the recon drone spotted it in the field. Then for something a little bit different for what we normally expect to see in the east, flying cows of a sort, as a Ukrainian FPV intercepted this unexpected air target. Now, fascinatingly, radars detected the target, followed by an FPV that was raised to intercept. In this instance, the AFU operator was more than happy to ram into the balloons in case of some unlikely but still possible small threat of the balloon either carrying some ordnance or being used as a signal booster, potentially unlikely, but these things could happen. So anything is possible because stray, uninvited balloons over a country's sovereign airspace has increasingly become something that's not tolerated since 2023. And I'm sure you all catch on to the Chinese balloon/spy balloon incident from last year that I refer to in that one. Then we'll head across to a bit of news, starting with a bit of a hardware update for Ukraine, with some perfect timing for this small piece, as Ukraine is continuing to upgrade their air defenses with identification systems against Russian recon drones and flying cows in all sorts of newly implemented ways, not the least of which is by use of directional radio receivers like this one that are used to locate the position of Russian reconnaissance drones by tracking their signals. Then in some more hardware news, Indian-made artillery shells are flowing into Ukraine, despite protests from Moscow. According to a number of recent reports now, India, traditionally known as somewhat of a strategic ally of Russia's, maintains close enough ties with Moscow but has not blocked the supply of shells to European countries, which are then diverted to Ukraine. While India publicly denies sending ammunition directly to Kyiv, the constant trickle-in of sources confirms that the flow of shells via Europe into Ukraine has been happening for at least or over a year now. Russia has gone on to reportedly raise concerns with India multiple times on the matter, but no significant actions have been taken on India's part. So as you can see, the BRICS nations continue to sell each other out. Then we'll head across to a Russian hardware update, one of my favorites, as Russians have been showing off their new M46 cannons. M46 as in 1946. So these Cold War artillery pieces, or technically speaking, pre-Cold War artillery pieces, utilize the non-standard 130mm artillery shells, which were deemed as obsolete by Russia back in 1975. But as we can see, what was in storage for at least half a century has been reactivated as part of the Russian MOD's desperate attempts to keep artillery on the field. And what's potentially funnier here is that the operator, a single operator at that, clearly has no faith in the system, hiding behind a protective barrier before yanking the howitzer's lanyard, which triggers the firing mechanism, igniting the primer, which in turn ignites the propellant charge in the shell. And what's even more unusual is how this footage came direct from the Russian Ministry of Defense, as if to indicate they have no editorial process to weed out any footage of their army using 80-year-old, obsolete, and by the way, very dangerous to artillerists. These howitzers are. Then headed across to a quick funny to round it all off for today, guys, and putting the focus back on everybody's favorite militant Chechen leader, Kadyrov, because you may remember the Cybertruck that Kadyrov imported indirectly into Russia from a month or two ago and imported indirectly to circumvent sanctions. Well, apart from the cringeworthy setup of an MG mounted on top, purely for show I might add, Ramzan Kadyrov is upset because, according to him, Tesla and even Elon Musk himself disabled it remotely. Which is a real oddity of a claim, considering that he had just previously made the claim that it was a gift from Musk. Though it is likely the case that Tesla was simply following compliance for international sanctions that well predate the initial production run of the electric pickup truck. Though it is still humorous to see Kadyrov running with the accusations on this front, as it appears the pickup truck has been bricked indefinitely. But no matter, because Cousin Caddy always has the option to revert back to showing off with some now classic cheating fake Kadyrov push-ups. That's my hero right there. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like and comment and subscribe if not already. Once again, thanks for the support, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.